Hey, welcome to Cafe Maddy. My name is Maddie, and you're tuning into an emotional podcast series where you send in an order in story form, and in return, I cook something customized and delicious for you. You can submit your story in the link below in the description if you're watching on YouTube, and you can tell me about something you're going through, any questions you might have in general, and every week I'll carefully pick an order and you get a custom menu along with a podcast about my own life. If you haven't already, you can find this podcast in audio form only on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hit that 5-star button so more people can enjoy the podcast as well. And on YouTube, you'll be able to actually see me talking and cooking as well. So, thank you for coming to Cafe Maddy today. Take a seat, wherever you are, make yourself at home. And let me take your order. So last week we had a ton of orders come in and it was really hard to pick just one. But there was one that stood out to me because it was as if my younger self had sent in her story to me. And if I could really go back and talk to my younger 15-year-old self, there is one thing I want to talk to her about. And this is it. But let's see. Our customer today is 15 years old. Her name is Issy from Australia. She says, "Hi Maddie. So I have 2 orders, I guess, and you can pick one. One is for feeling insecure and the other for feeling overwhelmed. I know these are very common feelings for someone my age, but how we get told to manage them at school doesn't connect with me at all. Starting with feeling insecure. I have a lot of hate. I hate the way I look, the way I talk. I hate my energy when I'm around people. I get tired and irritable really quickly. I also hate that I cry easily. I'm not in control of my emotions, and when I feel panicked or anxious or hurt, the stupid tears come running to the back of my eyes, waiting to burst. Now about being overwhelmed. I'm in my 11th year in high school, 2 years away from graduating, and I'm really looking forward to getting into dentistry. My subject load is intense, and alongside I have to manage all my extracurriculars and exams. I know I want this really badly, yet moments of unproductivity strike me too often. I think it's my lack of confidence and questioning of failure. I also feel very, very far behind. It's an ugly time. I would really appreciate any word of your advice. Thank you." Issy, first of all, I just want to say that reading this, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about you at all. I have complete faith in you that you're going to get through out of this ugly time and find your way in life. And when I was 15, I wish I had someone, like an adult I could talk to, who listened to me just hating myself through and through, and would still look me in the eye and say, "I have faith that you're going to turn out just fine." So coming right up is my original recipe that I'm making for Issy, a Cafe Maddy special called Gangdoenjang cabbage rolls. It's a spin on the Korean dish, or you can say it's a spin on the Italian stuffed cabbage rolls. But instead of tomato sauce, I made the sauce with doenjang. And I'll tell you why I'm making this when I'm done. Shall we? So, Issy, the story that I'm about to tell you is something that I wanted to tell for a really long time. It's because it's the answer to the question my younger self never knew how to ask. I didn't even know back then in my early 20s if I could ask this question of, how can I be kind to myself? I probably didn't even know that it was a problem, the way I talk to myself. The constant inner voice that put me down, that made me small, made me anxious and irritated. It was so inherent in me for a long time, and I programmed myself to talk this way. And to break this pattern, I needed an outer voice to point out to me that, hey, this is a problem. And it's a problem that can be fixed. And I know you didn't directly ask this question to me, but I feel like the 2 orders that you placed, this could cover all the grounds that you're talking about. So, fast forward to me. Now I am most of the time really kind to myself. I'm glad I exist. I give myself slack. I make myself laugh. I reassure myself. I believe in myself. And it started with a very intentional internal dialogue of my new language of high self-esteem that I told myself. And it's more than a discipline. There will be logos and chants from influencers and videos and whatever saying, love yourself. And it's like that scene in Euphoria. Have you seen? Where all these gorgeous Barbie looking influencers are screaming, love yourself, at one of the characters, Kat, who spirals into self-loathing, which I thought was an incredible scene, by the way. And we all see it. The disconnect between the message of self-love and self-care versus how to actually mean it and how to actually do it. And for me, it finally happened when I shifted my perspective, which changed my internal language. And now it's kind of becoming like second nature. And this alone changed my life. Changing the way I talk to myself has changed the way I make decisions, and it will continue to change my life for the better. So the first time someone pointed this out to me was in therapy. It was actually pretty recent. I was 27 and my therapist said, why don't we work on speaking kindly to yourself? And she gave me this worksheet where there are these 2 columns, and on one column, I wrote out my thoughts and what I was actually telling myself, and it was all of these bunch of negative things. And on the other column, I would reword these sentences into nicer and kinder words. And it was like, kind of cliche, kind of like Hallmark inspiration and encouragements like, you can do it, instead of the, oh my God, I can't do it in my first column. But it was still a pretty huge step for me of recognizing and writing out all this negativity that was pouring out from within onto myself. In Korean, we have this expression of spitting on the ceiling. 천장에 침 뱉다. And it's similar to the phrase digging your own grave. You're essentially throwing things that will only shoot back at you and do no good. So that was step 1, recognizing the problem. And with any problem, this is the most important step. But eventually I got stuck with these Hallmark unicorn phrases that I was supposed to swap out my negativity with, and it didn't feel genuine, and I needed something more. And then one day I came across a YouTube video that pretty much gave me the answer that I was looking for. It was this Korean girl named Kumseo who was talking about how she overcame self-hatred and learned to love herself. And I'll link the video somewhere in the description if you want to watch it. But she speaks in Korean, so let me sort of translate a summary for you. So, our Kumseo in the video talks about a time when she was really just wallowing in self-loathing and self-hate. And in the midst of this, she went on a long solo trip to Europe. And on this trip to Europe, she naturally found herself looking out for herself, for her safety against any theft or getting taken advantage of as a tourist. And she would do these simple things like buying herself a meal, making sure she had a place to stay. And these were all some things she didn't really have to worry about when she lived back at home. And through these simple tasks of taking care of herself, she got in touch with not her inner child, but her inner parent. She stumbled upon the role of a mother for herself. And she started to think, what would I say if I were my mom right now? What would I do for myself if I were my own mom? That's kind of weird, right? But it clicked for her. And every inner dialogue she had from then on, whenever she started to hate herself, she spoke to herself as if she was her own loving, nurturing mother. Think about it. If you had your own child, and the child was heartbroken or discouraged or sad, wouldn't you, with all the wisdom and years ahead of the child, want to comfort and encourage him or her? And what if that child was you? So this finally clicked for me in my mid-20s. And in my mid-20s, my inner child was so sad. She didn't ever think that she could do more outside of her set path to become more than what she was set up to do. And for the first time, I sat next to her and I felt heartbroken for her. It really wasn't the kind of self-pity that I was sulking in for a long time. It was more like a self-empathy. And for the first time, I stepped out of being in the pool of constant discouragement that was self-imposed, and I faced myself as my own caretaker. And only then, the hallmark phrases came to life, because this time, I really meant it. I said to myself, Maddie, I know so well that you are so sad, but you are going to be okay. You can let it out and you can cry, but after that, drink some water, eat something good, and take a deep breath. And let's start with the small things. You're suffering now, but this will all come to a pass and you can do it. I believe in you. Good things are coming your way and you're doing great. And in fact, that thing you wanted to do, you can do it and you'll ace it. You'll knock it out of the park. Good job. Well done. I'm here for you and I love you. So I've heard this before, where when you're hard on yourself, you're supposed to try talking to yourself as if you're talking to your best friend. But going even further and talking as if I was my own unconditionally loving mother, that took more of a firm place in my heart. And that was the moment that shifted my perspective, and it changed my internal voice. Being kind to yourself. It really could be a day-to-day discipline where you're constantly correcting your negative language. But I think it's more effective when you look a little deeper, and one, you might realize that your internal voice is programmed and built with whatever you were fed with from your parents as a kid. And this really isn't about harboring bitterness or putting the blame on your parents. If you've realized this and you're bitter at them right now, maybe forgiving them should come first. It might not even be your parents' fault, you know? I know that for me, I had this terrible tendency as a kid where I would cherry pick the worst of the worst that was said to me, and I would harbor and carry all that anger in my heart without letting in the actual love that was poured out on me. So that was totally on me. But if you've forgiven your parents and understand that they've tried their best and they're human too, and you recognize that the remnants of this hurtful language from your past is hurting you as an adult, this is a great place to start. And it's going to look a little different for everyone. How you sort of reprogram your brain, how you scrap that voice that's been there for so long and find the unconditionally loving parent within you. For me, it was a good look into my childhood and facing the harsh words that I was speaking into my life, and finally, the shift of perspective. A good amount of learning how to love unconditionally also had a lot to do with God, because I'm Christian. So as I learned how God was loving me unconditionally, which was pretty new to me and very different from how my parents loved me, I started to emulate the same love on myself. And if you're not Christian and if you're of a different religion, it would just look a little different for you. And also, if you're not religious at all, the people that love on you when you're an adult is going to have a lot of influence on how you learn how to love. That's so different from how you grew up with. So once I started to look after my own inner child, holding her, feeding her, nurturing and listening to her, asking her how she's feeling, how she's doing. For maybe a year or two, I started to see my life turn around. I'm 29, so it's only been a few years. But I started to listen to myself. I started to ask myself what I really wanted in life. And I nurtured a dream. This really took everything in me, but I took a step to believe in myself, to support my own dream, because I grew up feeling like nobody was really backing up or asking, what is it that I wanted to do? I mean, I was really privileged enough to get an amazing education and land on an amazing profession, but as I mentioned in my second episode about dreams, becoming a dentist was never my dream. So ever since I was a young girl, I always had this creative itch, but I was never encouraged to pursue it as a job, and instead I was told to take a safe path. So when I started to recognize and grow this undeniable dream in me, I was stalling forever because I had this absence of the voice that was supposed to say, go ahead, pursue what you want. It's okay to fail, and most importantly, the voice that said, I believe in you. And it really did take everything in me to muster up the realization and decision to be that voice for myself. One day I woke up and literally said, no one is going to do this for me unless I do. So you know what I did? I wrote a message to myself and I recorded myself saying this. It said, Maddie, I believe in your dream. You can do it. Give it your best and take a risk. And I think you're going to be fine. I support you. I'm your biggest supporter, number one fan. And listen, if you fail, so be it, okay? You live and you learn, and it's not the end of the world. And I kid you not, every time I woke up, I turned this video on. And I listened to it every single morning for weeks until it really just kind of became a part of my dialogue. So that's how I became kind to myself. The words you speak internally, it won't change with practice, but it'll change with the relationship you have with yourself. Do you have the strength to be your own parent? I hope this is helpful for some of you. You know, sometimes I wonder what it must be like to grow up showered in encouragement and expressive showering of love. And I definitely grew up under some tough love, and it was just different. But you know what? I don't wish that my life was any different. I think I like the way it happened in my 20s. It was literally like a metamorphosis, like a pearl churned in pain. Did you know that pearls and oysters, they're made when some impurity from the outside world enters the tender inside of the oyster. And the soft flesh of the oyster fights against it, churning this irritant for years, trying to protect itself. And in the end, it makes a beautiful pearl. So, back to Issy. Let me tell you a bit about our dish today. I call it 강된장 cabbage rolls because I basically use the same ingredients that would go into a traditional Korean dish called 강된장, and I put it into an Italian style roll. Soybean paste called 된장 has a terrific flavor, especially when it's paired with steamed cabbage and ground beef. But it's a lot of work. Especially if I'm cooking for myself, it's not really often justifiable that I put in this much time and effort to cook for myself. And it's definitely not a quick and easy meal. You have to mince the veggies, steam the cabbage, stuff it, roll it, make the sauce, and steam again. But in the end, it's really delicious and worth it. Issy, someday I really want to make this for you. I hope we cross paths one day. So in the video, I cooked this for myself, and that itself is an act of kindness. So I know you're going through a lot, but promise, Issy, you're going to grow out of it. And maybe not necessarily through the stories that I've just told you, but as you grow older and become acquainted with life, whether it be your own or other people's lives, you're going to find a story that makes sense to you. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to leave a review of the podcast, I would love to hear it. So feel free to comment down below if you are watching on YouTube. And the podcast is on Spotify and Apple Music under the title, The Cafe Maddy Podcast. You guys know the usual. Like, share, and subscribe. And most importantly, turn on the notifications if you want to stay tuned for next Friday, same day, same time. And special thanks to our music artist, Mr. Hong, for the custom track for our podcast. And every week, at the end of the video, I'll share music that I like, that you might like too. So I'll link the playlist right here on the screen. And every week, we'll be building a playlist from this podcast. Thanks for coming by. See you next week.